The moderator of the panel is Dr. Senthil Rajappa, medical oncologist from Hyderabad. The panelists for his session are Dr. Chetan Deshmukh, medical oncologist from Pune, Dr. G.S. Bhattacharya, medical oncologist from Kolkata, Dr. Prasad Narayan, medical oncologist from Bangalore, Dr. Ashish Bakshi, medical oncologist from Mumbai, Dr. Sudeep Gupta, medical oncologist from Mumbai, Dr. Rajiv Vijay Kumar, medical oncologist from Bangalore, and Dr. Syed Mohammad Akram Hussain, radiation oncologist from Bangladesh. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Sir, do you want to share this?
You take over the slides.
Perfect. So I'll just do that.
You keep the control.
Just one minute.
Okay, so the next, thanks Amish, thanks Dr. Sudeep for asking me to do this panel. In the next 45 minutes, I'm not too sure whether I will help you change your practice on Monday morning, because I'm going to talk about a set of drugs that are way beyond the reach of any one of us because of cost, because of access. But let's try to see through the data and check what we will do on Monday morning, at least from interpreting these studies. Next slide, Kashish. Okay, so let's start with this case scenario that Amish has actually given me. This is a 70-year-old lady with no comorbidities and has an operable T2N1, M0. She's triple positive. The HER2 is strongly staining. Like any other patient, and more so being elderly, she wants to know if chemotherapy can be avoided. So let me start with Prasad. Prasad, would you offer this lady TDM1 with pertuzumab?
No chemotherapy option, no. This patient, I would like to give a standard treatment.
You would like to give standard treatment. Next slide, yeah. Kashish. Chetan, are you around? Chetan?
Yes, I'm here.
Do you agree with Prasad that you would do standard treatment?
Yeah, I would.
Yes. Why is it that you don't want to choose TDM1 plus pertuzumab, Chetan? Is it because of the lower pathological complete response in this Christine study that randomized patients to TCHP versus TDM1 pertuzumab? Is that the reason?
For one, I won't find a patient who can afford both these.
Okay, let's say you are now, this is so-called FDA approved standard of care, Chetan, in Pune at least. Let's see whether you'll be happy to use it.
Not now, maybe. Maybe after some time, once we get some more data on this combination, yes. But right now, I would still stick to my standard therapy.
Okay, so there was a lot of heated discussion on pathological complete response in the previous panels. I don't want to, carry that discussion forward. But if let's invert the figures here, let's say that the TDM1 plus pertuzumab gave you a 10% more pathological complete responses compared to TCHP, would you have chosen that, assuming that cost is not a problem? Chetan?
If there is a significant benefit as far as pathological complete response is concerned, yes, definitely. 10%
okay, so you're saying that
significant number.
Okay, so what is significant by your standards, Chetan?
So you are saying that there is an increment in the PAT CR by 10%.
Yes.
That's good. That's quite a lot.
So that would prompt you to use.
Yeah, and if the lady can afford, and if she's a 70-year-old lady who is rather keen on avoiding chemotherapy, yes.
Very good. So Ashish, are you around, Ashish?
Yeah, I'm listening. Yes.
Next slide, please. So Ashish, because Chetan said he is happy to use this for a 10% difference in the pathological complete response. I think in HER2 positive breast cancer, we've already burnt our fingers with using pathological complete responses as surrogate markers, isn't it? The classical examples are the combination of trastuzumab plus lapatinib, doubling of pathological complete responses, but no improvement in ultimate outcome. Affinity Neosphere showed super pathological responses, but Dr. Sudeep clearly showed a 0.9% improvement in the long-term invasive disease-free survival. So do you think we should adopt drugs based on a difference in pathological complete responses, Ashish?
So in my view, achieving pathologic response rate should still be an aim of our neoadjuvant treatment, because particularly when you're classically treating with neoadjuvant therapy with trastuzumab, then at least you have an option of switching to TDM1 if there is lack of pathologic CR rate. Right. So that is, I would say, is only a one kind of reason why I would look for a pathologic CR in a patient.
Right.
As regards to the use of TDM1 in a neoadjuvant setting, I won't use that.
Great. So all of us won't use your TDM1 as a neoadjuvant.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Prasad.
So I can take something from Dr. Sudeep Gupta's last time when I had a panel. He was mentioning the delta of the PAT-CR correlation with delta on EFS and
we don't know.
survival, right? So that is what we will be waiting before we adopt anything like this.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. And the delta so far has been less than 1% in the
Right.
EFS. And I think that's the pathetic status of pathological complete response, at least in this situation. Dr. GS, are you there? Dr. GS Bhattacharya? I think he's not there. So Rajiv, let me ask you, Rajiv. So I'm showing you the EFS curves for this study here. The EFS curves are actually lying one on top of the other. The trick here is that there were 6% of patients on the TDM arm who actually progressed before surgery. And this EFS that you're seeing on this curve is excluding those patients, right?
Correct, sir.
Right. So is that a reason to do surgery first? Ashish clearly pointed out neoadjuvant therapy.
Sir, I would actually, this is one of the particular reasons why I would like to do chemotherapy rather than TDM1 upfront. So therefore, the TDM1 pertuzumab, it is a new trial which has come.
Right.
It has shown that it is less toxic, but this is just like saying that, okay, fine, these are the people who have not done well. I exclude them out of the trial and the rest of them have done so-called well. So we'll have to take everything into inclusion. We can't identify which of our patient belongs to 6%. So
correct.
I would rather stick to my standard guns.
Absolutely.
That's my chemotherapy, and rather than this is probably a reason why I would choose to do that, to stick to convention.
Absolutely. I think all of us agree that we should stick to convention, though this temptation of the studies that keep coming on and off to say that there is possibly a non-chemotherapy option in these patients. But I think as far as present evidence is concerned, there is no role for using a non-chemotherapy regimen in any of these patients, whether it is adjuvant or neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Next slide, please. Dr. Sudeep, I want you to come in here. Now, I have made a big list of the various things that are biomarkers to predict pathological complete responses in patients versus not, and so on and so forth. Now, I did a panel for you at Tata Hospital 5 years ago, and we discussed something very similar. And 5 years later, I'm still sitting in front of the same slide with no conclusions. So do you think we will ever get prospective randomized evidence to use any one of these that we have listed here in clinical practice, so that we will be able to offer this non-chemotherapy regimen for any of our patients at all? Dr. Sudeep, I want you to comment on that.
So I suppose your input variables are the ones that are listed on the slide, and the output variable that you're targeting is a PAT-CR.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Because we are using that as a surrogate, at least for this panel discussion, though I don't completely agree with that.
So, in the first instance, I have never been a great fan of pathological response as a surrogate for the delta in PCR to be a surrogate for the delta in survival, and which is why, the overarching focus on pathological response, to my mind, detracts from, many other points like long-term survival, like toxicity, like tolerability, like what happens to those who are just short of PAT-CR, etc., and so on. So I don't know whether, this is the right question to ask. To my mind, this is not a very interesting question. I do acknowledge and concede that, now the risk-adapted strategies as per CREATE-X and as per the TDM1 post-neoadjuvant study, I think they do, stimulate us to use neoadjuvant treatment in more number of patients. But I'm not sure whether you would want to predict PAT-CR, unless, of course, you want to put the surgeons out of business. So, some of these biomarkers could be used to, I don't think that, and in any case, the prediction would have to be of the order of about 95% positive predictive value for it to be useful.
Absolutely.
If you have a positive predictive value of, let's say, 65%, that leaves you nowhere. 70% it leaves you nowhere. You still have 30% of the patients in whom your prediction would be wrong. So I don't think that we will use this, at least in the foreseeable future, to predict who's going to get a PAT-CR and then tailor our treatment according to these biomarkers. I don't think so.
Absolutely correct. So that's what I also agree with you. And the reason why I put up this slide is if you look at all those discussions of trials where they're discussing about non-chemotherapy treatments, they always talk about predictive markers based on which you could reach a PAT-CR. While I agree with you that it's not a a great marker to try and achieve at the end of your neoadjuvant treatment, though it's one of them, the feeling is that if you're able to predict that, you might be able to stick on to a non-chemotherapy option, which doesn't look feasible at this point in time at all. And that none of this in the near future are likely to help us use any of these non-chemotherapy options is absolutely correct. So for
Let
now,
me say one more thing, Senthil, that I might start believing in these biomarkers to predict PAT-CR if the positive predictive value got somewhere near 95%. Then I will turn a believer, and then I will change my practice.
I don't think we will ever get to that point with any biomarker.
No, it is possible that it might happen, but until then, I will not sort of be such a big fan of this sort of line.
I absolutely agree. Both of PAT-CR and of using a biomarker to reach that endpoint. I very much agree that both of these should not be what we should be striving for. But at the end of the day, we stick to standard, which is not using TDM1 as TDM1 plus minus pertuzumab or whatever it is as your neoadjuvant or adjuvant therapy only. Rajiv, if we conclude this by saying that this is not standard and the only role for TDM1 should be the Catherine strategy where you use it for patients post
wherever suppose we have after regular neoadjuvant chemotherapy along with trastuzumab, if there is yet residual disease, only at that point of time shall we use TDM1. In the prior to that, there is not much role for TDM1 as per what we read.
So that's the only established role. Next slide, please. Right. So before we get into the metastatic setting, I just wanted to discuss Cleopatra. Cleopatra, lovely results. I think something that none of us will be able to deny as far as the benefit is concerned. So this is the 8-year follow-up of the Cleopatra study, 37% on the trastuzumab, pertuzumab arm versus 23%. That's about 14% absolute difference at the end of 8 years. Has a ratio of 0.69, nearly a 15-16 month difference in overall survival. Prasad, do you really see this in your clinical practice? 1 in 3 patients with HER2 positive disease surviving 8 years.
I mean, I don't have much experience with this protocol, but 8 years, 1/3 surviving is excellent, actually.
1/3 surviving. Ashish?
So even my experience of using pertuzumab in metastatic setting is negligible, I would say, primarily due to the cost constraints. So as Chetan mentioned, and I actually increasingly feel that we are in a situation we have so many fantastic drugs coming up, but no patients to treat them because hardly anyone is really able to afford it.
So many fantastic drugs.
And,
so water everywhere, not a drop to drink is what you're saying.
And actually, if you see, they have treated patients until progression. So to have a patient who can afford continue using pertuzumab and trastuzumab for 8 years at a stretch is something unthinkable in India.
No, so the point is that the median progression-free survival on pertuzumab was 18 months. So if you're saying 57 months is the median overall survival, so only for 1/3 of that survival patients have been on pertuzumab. After that, they've gone on to some and some and some. Next slide, Kashish, which is actually put up in this slide here to just tell you, the facts. 1 in 4 on the trastuzumab arm, which is what all of us use in 95% of all our patients, are also alive at 8 years. So Chetan, would you agree with that? 1 in 4 on trastuzumab, not pertuzumab, are alive at 8 years. Do you think that's something that you see in practice?
Yes, I do see a fairly large number of patients on trastuzumab doing well. And trastuzumab, the beauty of the drug is you can keep giving it, you can re-challenge it, you can combine it with something else. Somebody cannot afford pertuzumab, you can still combine with lapatinib and salvage it. So I tend to agree that yes, 1 in 4 would be alive at 8 years.
Very nice. Syed Mohammad Akram, I know you're a radiation oncologist, but unfortunately, I don't have a question for you from a radiation oncology standpoint. We'll come to that a little later when we talk about brain metastasis. Do you see your colleagues when they treat, they're very enthusiastic about this result? What is your
No, no,
feeling as a radiation doctor?
in generally, actually, we practice and we have the clinical oncology. So
Okay.
we do both the.
Oh, please, that's great. Please let us.
Yeah. So can you repeat your question again?
No, do 1 in 4 of your patients who take just trastuzumab, not pertuzumab, for metastatic breast cancer actually end up surviving for 8 years? 25% of all your patients?
Oh, no, because I don't have such a big data, because most of the patients in our here is difficult to receive pertuzumab, because this is very costly, and there is no insurance scheme. It's very difficult for them to continue all these drugs.
Because,
yeah, Ashish, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think 1 in 4 of trastuzumab treated patients, I think we are seeing that. I would say that.
Very nice.
Definitely, if you see from the last 10 years, the outcome of HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer has tremendously improved. So although we do not really have kind of kept that kind of data, but I agree with this that a lot of our patients are really surviving for really a long period of time.
Great. Dr. Sudeep, you must be having long-term data from your patients at Tata Hospital, and nothing spectacular in terms of the therapies that they have used after progression in this study. Things that we routinely use, we have a sprinkling of patients on Kadcyla and then lapatinib. So do you have long-term data on these patients from Tata Hospital, Dr. Sudeep?
So in the metastatic setting, we have not analyzed. We do have the data, but we do not have a formal analysis, the results of which I can share with you. I agree with all my colleagues that the outcome of patients with metastatic breast cancer has improved in the past many years, and we do see a fair number of people or patients who go on surviving for a long period of time. But I just want to make the point that 37% and 23% is not only due to these drugs. It is also because when you satisfy inclusion criteria number 1 to 8 and exclusion criteria number 9 to 16 in any clinical trial, you will improve the survival compared to the cohort that you see in your clinic. So, they should have had their liver function should have been normal, their renal function should have been normal, their hematological, their performance status, their echocardiograms. There is a defined time period from previous adjuvant treatment, etc., and so on. So just the fact of satisfying the eligibility criteria of a study improves the survival of that cohort. But having said that, these are really outstanding results with pertuzumab, and I completely agree that if patients are able to afford it, then this would be a practice-defining study.
Absolutely. So I think this is one place where, next slide please, where we would not really debate that, and I think that's why, at least from a HER2 positive cancer standpoint, it looks like this is the most romantic couple. Whether in the neoadjuvant and adjuvant setting they look as romantic as what I've showed here, I have my own doubts, but at least from a metastatic standpoint, it looks like they are the most romantic. Next slide, please. Right, so let's continue our case. So our patient had conventional therapy, AC Taxol, and then she did achieve a pathological complete response. She completed 5 years of an adjuvant AI, and then she, on recommendation of her relative from the US, had a PET CT scan. And the scan showed 5 bone metastases and 4 lung metastases. The largest was 3.5 centimeter, all of them, of course, asymptomatic. A rebiopsy from the lung was done, absolutely similar to what it was at diagnosis. ER strongly positive, PR strongly positive, HER2 was also positive. Next slide, please. So what is your choice, Prasad? Taxane plus dual anti-HER2 Cleopatra, or an AI plus dual anti-HER2, or fulvestrant plus abemaciclib plus trastuzumab? What would be your choice of therapy for this particular patient?
So the robust data is for option 1.
What would be your choice?
I would recommend option 1.
You would recommend option 1. Yes. Ashish?
So I would also recommend option 1 to the patient. But from what I gather, like she was 70 when she was first diagnosed.
So she is 76 now, but still she can run a marathon.
In that situation, I think option 1 I would discuss with the patient, but I think by this point of time, most of the patients are quite reluctant to receive chemotherapy. So in case if she says no, then I would select the third option. That is,
so you would prefer chemotherapy plus dual anti-HER2, but considering her age, you don't want to do that. Is that correct? Very good. Rajiv, what would be your choice?
76-year-old lady. I don't. She's doing well. I'd keep my fingers crossed. I would not want to do. She's not in visceral crisis. Sticking to that, I would go ahead with hormone therapy. There's option 2, AI with dual anti-HER2 if possible. Else, I would do fulvestrant plus Abema plus trastuzumab. That's the new.
So you would also think about fulvestrant plus Abema plus trastuzumab. Next slide, the Kashish. So this is the ESMO's guideline, which says that the option of chemo plus dual anti-HER2 is there. But I also want you to look at the right extreme of this algorithm, which says that patients who are unsuitable for chemotherapy or with long disease-free interval, minimal disease burden, and or strong ER/PR expression, then endocrine therapy plus anti-HER2 therapy, dual anti-HER2 therapy is also an option for this patient. So, I mean, Rajiv is in a way right that in this patient, using a hormonal therapy plus dual anti-HER2 therapy is also an option. Dr. Sudeep, what are your thoughts on this patient?
First of all, I think because this lady is such an outlier that she can run a marathon at the age of 76, I think I'm sure that not more than 1 or 2% of the audience here would be able to do that. If that be the case, then
that's why we are in a panel discussion today with anti-HER2.
Yes, but if she
only 1%
really,
of this is going to be Monday morning.
I think of all the panelists, it's just Prasad.
Okay,
yeah,
Prasad.
only Prasad and maybe 1 or 2 others who can really run a 42-kilometer marathon. But if that is the case,
yeah, she's fit.
And I think what I meant. Then if she's completely fit, then I think one could give her I would give her a taxane and the dual HER2 therapy because there is proven overall survival benefit. But having said that, most of my patients who are 76 years old are far from the level of fitness that you describe. And in those patients, I would not hesitate to recommend endocrine therapy with the HER2 targeted therapy.
So all of us seem to be preferring chemo plus dual anti-HER2, but all of us are game for endocrine therapy in specific situations. Is that the point that we are trying to make? Rajiv, would this approach be different for a 45-year-old lady because you're the only one who said endocrine therapy plus dual anti-HER2 therapy?
So for a younger lady, again, if she's asymptomatic, like how we are saying here, I would like to try with this option number 2, and then subsequently, although the protocol over here, it gives very clearly give chemotherapy, and if it's unsuitable, then going for this. But if she's asymptomatic and if she's willing, why not? I would definitely give her and see how long I can go it.
Prasad, everybody wants to know your opinion. Next
actually,
slide.
Senthil.
Yeah, go ahead.
This about this abemaciclib as an option here. I think giving paclitaxel plus dual anti-HER2 might be easier than giving a CDK4/6 inhibitor. And
we'll come to abemaciclib a little.
Yeah. I actually agree with Prasad. I agree with Prasad.
Yeah, we'll come to abemaciclib in exactly 2 minutes. So this is just some quick review of literature. This is the PERTINE study. First line, patients, half of them actually had some chemotherapy and then went on to receive hormone plus dual anti-HER2 therapy, while another half of them actually did not have any chemotherapy at all. They went and straight away had hormone plus a dual anti-HER2 therapy. And if you look at the progression-free survival, it's not very different from what you get on taxane plus a dual anti-HER2 therapy with the hormonal therapy here. It's 21.72 months versus just over 10 months, which is again not very different from what you get with chemo and trastuzumab as PFS for first line. I agree that the overall survival is not shown here clearly, but the PFS is different. Dr. Sudeep, your thoughts on that? The PFS seems to be very comparable to taxane plus dual anti-HER2 therapy.
So I did not understand what you're saying because pertuzumab. So which PFS
so this
are
is
you
PERTINE. I'm
to?
talking about the one half of patients who actually have no chemotherapy and they straight went on to hormone plus a dual anti-HER2 therapy. And the PFS on this group of patients was not very different from what you got on the Cleopatra study.
Yeah, that is, the reason why they did not receive chemotherapy and, it is of course known that endocrine therapy, and especially in patients who have strong expression of the endocrine receptors, endocrine therapy is also a good treatment. And my personal impression is that if there was to be another study, randomized study comparing chemotherapy with HER2 targeted therapy versus endocrine therapy plus HER2 targeted therapy and followed on up to overall survival, I don't think there'll be an overall survival difference between them in patients who strongly express the endocrine receptors. But, having said that, if a patient is fit, then, it is hard to ignore the data like Cleopatra. And then, you have to, I mean, in a fit patient, I would use chemotherapy.
Okay, fine. So we would agree. I mean, ultimately, it all comes to our opinions and observations and judgment. All of us seem to be preferring chemotherapy in this group of patients. Next slide, please. This is again similar data with alternative, which is again a second line study, but this is very interestingly something that all of us can use, which is with the trastuzumab and lapatinib with an aromatase inhibitor. Again, there seems to be numbers that are very much comparable to what you get with chemotherapy. So the point is that wherever possible, and we think it's appropriate, hormone plus a dual anti-HER2 therapy is something that is available as a choice for our patients with strong ER/PR positivity, of course, HER2 positive, and will fit into the group that is appropriate for hormonal therapy and not chemotherapy. Next one. Yes, Prasad, there you are. We come to our Monarch-HER study, which is a third line and beyond study. Nearly 100% had trastuzumab and T-DM1. None of them had fulvestrant. So the randomization was between whatever I have shown in this slide. Let me not go through all this randomization all over again. Next slide, please. Yes, so these are the results for the group that had abemaciclib, fulvestrant, and trastuzumab. The response rate was decent. It was 32% in this third line and beyond study. Compared to the other two arms, the progression-free survival was better, though the delta was 2.6 months. Whether it's clinically significant or not is for something that the individual has to decide. Prasad, where does this fit in your algorithm?
So before Prasad answers that question, can I ask you one question?
Yes,
Senthil, do we know?
No, I am the moderator. I'm happy to answer.
No. I just want some, I have not read this study in detail, but have they provided any information about the strength of the ER expression in these patients?
No, they have
or was it all comers?
Okay. It was all comers. They have not mentioned the strength of the ER. No, not.
Okay.
Prasad?
Okay, sorry. So
no, that's fine, sir. Prasad?
Yeah, so in practice, I think the inclusion will have to, the patient should get both dual HER2 blockage before entry, right?
Should have got it in sequence. Right, yeah, correct. Right. So she should have had T-DM1 and pertuzumab at some point in time. Yes.
So third line, we can consider this option actually. That's what I would say.
Okay. Chetan, would you consider it earlier during the course of your therapy?
No, I agree with Prasad. I would still stick to only after using all other options. I won't use it earlier.
Ashish, so we are going to talk about tucatinib and pyrotinib and trastuzumab, deruxtecan, all look to be very, very effective in this group of patients. So in this list with all of those incorporated, where would this fit in, Ashish?
I think as we discussed for this lady, the one who is really kind of elderly lady, comorbidities, not able to tolerate chemotherapy, those are the patients in whom I think this is a good option to kind of treat the patients. You are getting a median progression-free survival of about say 11 to 12 months. Here with in this trial, it was about 8 months. So in those group of patients, I think it is still an option.
Rajiv, do you think it's attractive to use abemaciclib, which has some activity in the CNS in patients with HER2 positive disease as a CDK4/6 inhibitor of choice? Is that relevant?
It seems very interesting, sir. So what I understand is when you're between your option 2 and option 3, option 2 was one AI along with 2 anti-HER2. Option 2 is you're using one anti-HER2 along with targeting 2 molecules for the hormone receptor. So that's one is your CDK4 inhibitor and one is your fulvestrant. So wherever when you're using these multiple drugs, we are able to see that is a better response when compared to using just single or double therapy. So it's actually the data seems to be very exciting at the same time very confusing as well, because do you use a double HER2, do you use a double hormonal, which is more active? We don't know which was more active in these patients. It's really difficult for us to comprehend. You probably all could help us out.
So let's ask Dr. Sudeep to help us out, because everybody seems to be confused with the number of options that we have, and where does something like this fit in your sequence of therapies, Dr. Sudeep?
So, first of all, there is a subset of patients with HER2 positive disease that behave quite similar to ER positive, and those are the ones that have relatively nice expression of the endocrine receptors. And if you were to do a gene expression profile on them, the profile will fall somewhere in between the luminal and the HER2 category. It's not a pure HER2 driven. And this trial has about 80 patients in each arm. I would say that in this trial population, they have received multiple lines of chemotherapy. They have received multiple lines of HER2 target therapy. I think the option with trastuzumab is quite attractive, and I would be tempted to use this, especially also because the drugs are available and they are, not that horrendously expensive.
Right. So you would say that would you be using it a little earlier rather than the third line in an appropriate patient?
So no, not earlier, but
Okay.
in a patient that satisfies the criteria for this study, I think this is a reasonable, even though it is 80 patients, but here, I'm not even looking at the improvement in PFS. To my mind,
Right.
at least there is no detriment in PFS versus using chemotherapy. So, I think this is a reasonable option in this kind of a patient, but I would not use it earlier than this.
All right. So nobody would use it earlier than this. That's perfectly acceptable. Next slide, please. So as far as hormonal therapy in the hormonal plus anti-HER2 therapy in this group of patients is concerned, yes, a selective set is appropriate, but none of our panelists, and I agree with that, are not for use of a CDK4/6 inhibitor early in the course of the disease. So let's cut a long story short. So this lady went on fulvestrant, trastuzumab, pertuzumab, had a PR, and then she had some Katsila, so hypothetical standard stable disease. Now has progressive disease with 3 new liver and bone metastasis, 4 asymptomatic brain metastasis. The largest is 1.5 centimeter. Performance status is 1. So she still wants some treatment. So it's now a couple of years more. So she's nearing 90 if you really want to look at her age as such. TKI or trastuzumab, deruxtecan, Prasad?
So you can involve the radiation oncologist now.
We are going to involve them. TKI or trastuzumab, deruxtecan, Prasad? Next slide, please.
I think she will not qualify for any of those trials. I don't have any
Very good.
personal experience.
That's a good point. So how do we treat her?
Right. So there is data for both the TK and trastuzumab deruxtecan, and maybe the data on trastuzumab deruxtecan looks slightly better. Even in, I think that seems to be the drug which will change. And
okay, you think trastuzumab deruxtecan might be a better drug. So this is the HER2 CLIMB study, the very talked about study, where patients with, half of all patients had brain metastasis. Some of them were actually active progressing brain metastasis. Patients were randomized to tucatinib, trastuzumab, capecitabine on one arm versus placebo, trastuzumab, and capecitabine on the other. Next slide, please. I just wanted you to comment on this randomization here. Chetan, do you think the comparator arm should have had lapatinib instead of trastuzumab? Because at least what all of us believe is that lapatinib is a drug that gets into the brain better than trastuzumab itself.
Yeah, I think so. I agree that should have probably been a better competitor.
So Ashish, do you think the results would have been a little less attractive than what you're seeing today if your comparator was a stronger one?
I don't think so, really.
You don't think so?
You look at the Cerebral study results, the results have been quite comparable between trastuzumab with capecitabine versus lapatinib plus capecitabine.
Right.
Probably, I don't think so.
You don't think so, Rajiv?
I think should have been LabCap versus tucatinib and capecitabine. That would have been the thing. Otherwise, it's totally LabCap is what we have been using in this particular scenario in our regular clinical practice. Just tucatinib, how much of a difference only we don't know unless we have a head-on.
Right. Okay. So we have some problems with the randomization, but at least some of us think that the outcomes would have been no different. The hazard ratios would have still been the. Dr. Sudeep, since you spoke about hazard ratios to begin with, all of us would believe that the hazard ratio also depends upon how well your competitor performs. So, do you think the hazard ratios would have been a little less attractive if the competitor was a little stronger? Next slide, please.
Yes, of course. One way to make your trial positive is to weaken the control arm. And I have made this point earlier about this study that it should not have been instead of trastuzumab. It should have been, the control arm should have been lapatinib plus trastuzumab plus capecitabine, not instead. And then the experimental arm should have been tucatinib plus trastuzumab plus capecitabine.
Absolutely.
And then, I would be really interested to see what it would have been.
That's
we
correct.
also know that, dual HER2 blockade from old studies does have some value. It is not just additive effect. It is also a little bit of synergism because of their difference in, their mechanisms of action. And I, for one, definitely think, and I've made this point earlier, it should have been lapatinib plus trastuzumab plus capecitabine.
I very much agree with you, and that's the point I was also trying to make. So this is the median PFS for all patients, the intent to treat, and the one on the right is the median PFS for patients who had brain metastasis. Again, results which are very, very impressive. The PFS for patients with brain metastasis only was actually higher than PFS for patients who had a combination of brain metastasis plus systemic metastasis. There is the data in the supplement, which is a little higher, but still numerically lesser than what you get for patients with brain metastasis alone. Next slide, please. That's the median overall survival for the intent to treat, 21 months versus 17.5 months for all patients. So that overall survival is also statistically significant. Next slide. So let me quickly run through my panelists. Since I had sent you these slides, I am hoping that you would have seen this data comparing tucatinib versus trastuzumab. Again, cross-trial comparison. The numbers are put up in front of you. Prasad said he would prefer trastuzumab deruxtecan. Ashish?
Tucatinib.
Tucatinib. Very good. One specific reason why tucatinib?
Because she has got brain metastasis, better CNS penetration, and probably like later on if she progresses, I would use TDXD.
Okay, Rajiv.
Sir, I would use trastuzumab deruxtecan. Although our understanding is that the blood-brain barrier, lapatinib crosses or tucatinib crosses. Now that when we have brain mets, patient is also irradiated, the blood-brain barrier or the tumor-brain barrier is breached. Hence, trastuzumab deruxtecan, being a larger molecule, can yet penetrate. So that's the reason they have given as to why these drugs yet work.
Okay, fine. So you're saying trastuzumab deruxtecan is your choice. Is that correct? Do I understand it right? Very good. Chetan?
I'll stick to tucatinib.
You will stick to tucatinib. Dr. Syed, I'm showing you some response rates here, which are around 50 to 60% for these drugs now. And a tucatinib trial actually enrolled patients who had active progressing brain metastasis. Do you think that we are reaching a point like lung cancer where we will now say, hang on, if your patients are asymptomatic with brain metastasis, let me try my medicine and then call you to radiate? Do you think the time has come to look at HER2 positive breast cancer also like that?
No, you can give radiation. That's not a problem. This could be maybe multiple more than 4 or 5 meds. You can give the radiation because of many functional problem will be there. This is one could be done, but in this trial actually they don't the radiation group, they are not they use the patient which is not immediately giving radiation. So another one thing actually is my idea actually the HER2 climb, tucatinib, capecitabine and trastuzumab, but brain mets actually doing well, but the trastuzumab deruxtecan only 15% of the brain metastasis patients are there, though the median progression-free survival was 18 months actually. So we need to look into the subgroup of the patient of brain mets actually how they are doing.
Okay, so you're saying that it has to be actually individualized. I agree very much with you. Dr. Sudeep, what are your thoughts on the comparison that I have put up here? Again, cross-trial comparison.
So first of all, the cross-trial comparison means that the DESTINY trial was a more heavily pre-treated group compared to the HER2 climb. And just remind me, this is the same lady who was 70 years old and then 76 years
Okay,
old.
let's keep
It's
it
the
at
same
50
one,
now.
no?
Let's keep it at 50
Okay.
now. Because you seem to be
Okay.
stuck with the 70. Now let's make it 50.
No. We have to see. We are treating a patient. No, we are
Okay,
not
we'll
sort of
give it to you.
engaging
She's
in just a
90 now.
theoretical.
She's 90 now.
Okay. So just jokes apart, I
Yeah.
think a phase 3 trial always has more definitive results compared to a phase 1-2 trial, however good a phase 1-2 trial is. And I am very excited about trastuzumab deruxtecan. I'm very concerned about pneumonitis and ocular toxicity, etc., and so on. But in this sort of a situation, if tucatinib was available, I would prefer that. And I was about to say that in many such patients, we have been treating them with trastuzumab and lapatinib for a long period of time. And we are just about to publish our data on more than 100 patients of HER2 positive breast cancer with brain metastasis from Tata Hospital, and we'll have some interesting data to share with you.
Very good. We look forward to the data, Dr. Sudeep, as always. So
I
better
think-
not do cross-trial comparisons. That's absolutely spoken like a purist. The next slide, please. So so it looks like this is where all the other drugs have been pushed to, but I'm sure they will rise later, because this is a situation where patients continue to live, and you will want one drug after the other and come back all over again into that conveyor belt. So I think it's not that all of them go down forever. They will come up at a later point in time. Next slide. Yes. So Dr. Sudeep, this question is only for you. So who do you think will be the competitor to Shah Rukh Khan and Kajal? If you were to design a phase 3 study today, who would you put there? TDX plus tucatinib?
So say that again. I
If
was
you were to
actually
design a
looking
randomized,
I was actually looking at Kareena Kapoor, but with that other guy who she was with earlier, not
Saif
with
Ali Khan. So let's say that is
Saif
trastuzumab
Ali Khan.
deruxtecan.
So actually, I was
Kareena Kapoor
beginning
seems to
to
have
give
caught
you a
your eye.
choice
That's
on the
tucatinib.
screen. Tucatinib plus what versus what?
No, if Saif Ali Khan was trastuzumab deruxtecan and Kareena Kapoor, who seems to have caught your eye, is tucatinib, would you put them together in a randomized trial against Shah Rukh Khan and Kajal, who are trastuzumab and pertuzumab?
Yeah, why not? Why
Very
not?
good.
Why not?
Okay.
I mean, they have non-overlapping mechanisms, and both of them individually have shown good results, and so why not?
Very good. So I think that's something that I don't know, or I don't think that's happening at this point in time, but we look forward to something like that. Next slide, please. And I think this is typically what happens to our patients with HER2 positive breast cancer. They end up with Mukesh Ambani and end up like, Anil Ambani. And that's very, very important. So Ashish, let's say you want to put a price on tucatinib today. 1 month's treatment, what would your cost be?
I would say 30,000 or so.
30,000. Prasad?
He means $30,000 actually.
Oh my
not
goodness.
30,000. In my view, lapatinib will be our poor man's tucatinib.
Correct.
So the reason that you mentioned that combining lapatinib with trastuzumab plus hormone therapy or chemotherapy is something that probably we are.
Hang on. We are running short of time. Prasad, what is your cost for tucatinib?
Anything more than 50K will be like only theoretical after that.
Okay, from Anil Ambani to Senthil Rajappa, then no more money at all. Fine. What about Rajiv? Trastuzumab deruxtecan. What would be your cost per month that is acceptable to you with the results? You were very impressed with those results.
I would probably nothing more than 1.5 lakhs per month.
1.5 lakhs. You seem to be seeing a set of very rich patients. I'm glad. Chetan?
Yeah, about 1 lakh.
About 1 lakh. So 50,000 to 1 lakh per month is what seems to be acceptable, with these so-called new drugs. But I don't think it will be anywhere close to the figures that any one of us, even in the wildest of our dreams, are imagining. So I think we are running out of time. Let me conclude the last slide. Next one, please. Yes. So this is
Senthil,
yes.
Is it correct that trastuzumab deruxtecan, the current cost is about 25 lakhs of rupees per cycle? Is that
I don't
the
know,
cost?
sir. I've not even looked at it. I don't intend to.
Actually,
I think so. I think.
I had
Yeah.
inquired.
Yes, Ashish.
polatuzumab vedotin for one of our patient. So the cost
Yeah.
for one cycle was coming out to be 14 lakhs. And I thought,
It's 5 lakhs.
really afford this kind of treatment.
Very good, very good. So I think that's what I'm going to tell you at the end of this whole story and discussion. So Amish wanted to ask these questions, so I will put up the answers, and this is what our panel also seems to be saying. Is pertuzumab value for money? I think all of us agree that it is value for money, but I think the question is, where is the money? The role of TDM1 in localized HER2 positive disease, I think it's nothing beyond Catherine at this point in time. And as Dr. Sudeep mentioned, and I agree with him, will we ever have a non-chemotherapy option based on those biomarkers? I don't think so. Role of CDK4/6 in triple positive, not yet first line, but everybody thinks it can be used at some point in time. But what I think is very important is that an AI plus anti-HER2 therapy for select patients is very important not to forget. Beg, borrow, or steal, but get tucatinib. Yes, Amish, we can only beg, borrow, and steal because I don't think we'll be ever able to buy tucatinib. But also think about trastuzumab deruxtecan with whatever we have. Next slide, please. And I think HER2 positive disease is something like this. Reality really bites because we have all these options. It's like a diabetic standing in front of a dessert buffet. He can't put his fingers on anything unless you beg, borrow, or steal without telling your physician. Thank you so much, all your panelists. And I thought we will end with dessert. That will be appropriate for you guys to go to dinner. Of course, after Jyoti's panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone. I now request Dr. Dinesh Doval, medical oncologist from New Delhi, to please give the expert comment. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to all of you. And I think Senthil did a very nice panel discussion. It has been about 20 years since we had the Herceptin available, and now we have plethora of drugs that are available to us. And as was being talked, it is, we are spoiled for choices. But choices, again, whether we are able to use them in the practical logistics is very, very difficult to say. As was very rightly said by Senthil, the drug for value is pertuzumab, and that also in the neoadjuvant setting. Neoadjuvant setting is one of the best setting. It can also be tried in the metastatic setting. TDM1, the real place is only in the consolidated treatment after neoadjuvant. We have the other drugs available, which was being talked about. Nothing is less than 5 lakhs a month. So if you want to find out about tucatinib or rituximab, the drugs are very, very costly. But yeah, definitely science has to progress. And there are some trials that are ongoing. In future, maybe we may have a trial for trastuzumab deruxtecan, but nothing as far as the other drugs are concerned. I think there are many more drugs that are to come, and the cost is definitely going to be a major concern. I don't know whether how many of us will be really able to use the drugs beyond Herceptin, pertuzumab, and TDM1, and capecitabine, because even neratinib is quite costly. Tucatinib is much more costlier, and we don't know where the price for the rituximab will be there. So, but I think we are spoiled for choices, and I think it's a lot of exciting era as far as HER2 positive disease is concerned, and we can see the patients who are alive for much more longer. It used to be a very, very aggressive disease, and today we are able to make it into much more chronic disease thanks to the drug like Herceptin, which still holds the clue for the response in this particular disease. Thank you so much.